December 9th, 2017. An infant boy by the name of Tiantian is born in a quiet corner of a hospital in Guangzhou, China. All four grandparents are present, overjoyed as he emerges into the world, healthy and screaming. But a dark cloud hangs over their celebration. His maternal grandmother sees him and says, "His eyes look like my daughter's." She thinks back to that wretched day 4 years ago when she learned that her daughter, Tiantian's mother, died alongside his father in a horrific car accident. Today's episode concerns the ethics and mechanics surrounding fertility and parenthood. If you're struggling with or have questions about fertility, it's best to speak with medical professionals. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could someone be born after their parents died? Jinx, you owe me a coffee.
Hey, how do you know what I'm thinking? Hey, be careful what you think around him.
Shen Jie and Liu Shi had been planning pregnancy after experiencing fertility issues, so they had frozen a number of embryos ahead of time at Nanjing Gulo Hospital for in vitro fertilization. The problem was they both died in a car crash 5 days before they were slated to undergo the procedure.
So, what do you do with an embryo when the people who provided the DNA for it are dead and gone?
This is where the grandparents come in. Shan and Liu were both the last in line for both sides of their family, a result of China's controversial one-child policy. Because of this, the to-be grandparents knew it was paramount that they acquire the legal right to handle the embryos. Since there are no regulations concerning the legal ownership and disposal of human embryos, the parents of Shanqi waged a drawn-out legal battle with the parents of Liu Shi because suing the hospital would be too risky to decide who had the right to the embryos. In the first trial, the Yixing People's Court said that no one could take the embryos from the hospital because an embryo has the potential to develop into a life, so it is not allowed to be transferred or inherited like other objects. The second trial, however, found that while Shan's parents could not own the embryos, they could be transferred the responsibility of the disposal of the embryos. The court said that the embryos left by Shan and Liu are the only carriers of the two families' bloodlines, and they carry the memories of their parents and can provide emotional consolation to them. Shan's parents won their fight in court in September 2014, but when they asked the hospital where the embryos were kept, they said no. The hospital could only release the embryos to another medical institution, not to individuals. Surrogacy is banned in China, so no other hospitals in the country would accept the embryos. The grandparents spoke to a surrogacy agency run by Liu Baojun, who directed them to a hospital in Laos where there was no such ban. Before we continue, let's just talk quickly about what surrogacy is. There are two main types, traditional and gestational. Traditional surrogacy has the surrogate provide their own egg, which is half of the genetic information, while the sperm is provided by a donor. Unless a contract saying otherwise has been drafted, the surrogate would have a legal claim to parentage. In gestational surrogacy, the entirety of the genetic material is provided by donors, usually the couple trying to conceive, and the embryo is implanted inside the surrogate via IVF. A contract is still required for gestational surrogacy, however in that case, the surrogate does not start with automatic parentage of the child, which makes things a little less complicated.
I also realized that not everyone might know what an in vitro fertilization is. To put it simply, IVF is when a sperm and an egg are fertilized outside of a womb and then placed inside a womb to grow.
It's like brewing a cup of coffee, except you don't need to grind the beans.
I guess? People with uteruses choose to become surrogates for a variety of reasons, some emotional, some financial. The surrogacy business in the United States alone provides service to over 8 million infertile individuals who spend over $3 billion a year to help them conceive. The cost of a single surrogate pregnancy in the US sits between $40,000 to around $120,000. Surrogates themselves are usually compensated between $20,000 to $25,000 in the United States, but many countries have banned the compensation of surrogates altogether. For example, here in Canada, a surrogate may only be compensated for out-of-pocket expenses related to the pregnancy.
After Tiantian's grandparents had been granted the embryos, they encountered a new problem. There were no airlines willing to transport the little bottle of liquid nitrogen that housed the embryos from China to Laos for fear of legal recourse against them. The grandparents would have to transport the embryos by land. So they set out to cross the 1,600 kilometers from Guangzhou to Laos, bouncing along the road with their precious cargo for over 20 hours, their hopes of grandchildren building as the mile markers slowly counted down to their fateful meeting in the other country. The family, with the help of Liu Baojun and his agency, picked a Laotian woman to be surrogate from a pool of over 20 women, and the IVF implantation took place sometime in April 2017. Although, this presented yet another problem for the family. They needed to find a way to smuggle their surrogate into a Chinese hospital to have the baby, or else the child could not be guaranteed to obtain Chinese citizenship.
See, anyone who is born within the People's Republic of China is automatically given citizenship. But if someone is born abroad, they can get Chinese citizenship if one of the parents is a citizen.
Technically, both of Tiantian's parents were Chinese citizens despite being deceased. However, this surrogate mother was of Laotian citizenship, so the family was in a strange gray area where he was not guaranteed citizenship. They needed to get their surrogate into China and solve this problem by getting the Laotian mother a tourist visa, arranging for her to give birth at a private hospital in southern Guangzhou. However, children born via surrogacy must have their DNA tested to ensure that one of the biological parents is of Chinese citizenship. And since both the parents were dead, all 4 grandparents needed to come in and prove that they provided the DNA that provided the DNA for the baby. It took 15 days for the test to come back, but they were positive, and the baby was relinquished into the care of Shen Xinan and his wife. His maternal grandmother named him Tiantian, or Sweet Sweet, to commemorate his parents who could not live to see his birth. Since surrogacy is still controversial in many countries, it stands to reason that it has its critics. The practice has encountered critics in both feminists and religious conservatives.
Wow, and they never agree on anything.
Yeah, they're like yoga and denim.
That's right, I think. But when they do agree, it's rarely for the same reasons. Elizabeth Scott, in a paper titled Surrogacy and the Politics of Commodification, notes that opponents argue that surrogacy contracts were baby-selling arrangements that exploited poor women who either were coerced or did not understand the consequences of their decisions. It's also argued that surrogacy degraded the female reproductive function and undermined the family.
If we view pregnancy in the same lens as physical labor, then a surrogate would be working 24 hours a day, every day for 9 months. Even if we use the high average for compensation in the US, $25,000, then the hourly pay comes to a little over $3.50 an hour.
Surrogates do have specific rights, though. According to surrogacy agency Conceivabilities, some of those include the right to have health insurance, to be informed of any medical procedures and side effects, choose their medical team, receive psychological support, and receive reimbursements agreed in a legal agreement. This, of course, changes from country to country. A surrogate mother, though, has no right to keep the baby. Legal parenthood is established using a pre-birth order that defines the intended parents as the legal parents of the child. Without this, the intended parents would, in some cases, have to undergo DNA testing similar to what the grandparents of Tiantian did. In many countries, the rights of the child are usually overlooked. According to the Center of Bioethics and Culture, the child does not have any right to meet their gestational carrier or their biological parents if the intended parents are not biologically related. There are no laws that guarantee the child the right to information concerning any siblings or family members they may have outside of their intended parents. There is no legal obligation to tell the child the truth about their origin.
We can see this in action with Tiantian. His grandparents chose to tell him that his parents are living abroad for the time being, saying that they want to wait until he is older and wiser before telling him the truth. Shen Xinan, his grandfather, said that we will definitely tell him what happened. What choice do we have?
Oh, if I was him, I'd want to know.
It raises a sticky ethical issue. Tiantian's parents are dead, but his grandparents, the intended parents, are going to lie to him. His grandparents, if they so choose, can let him think his parents are abroad his entire life. There is no legal obligation for anyone to tell him the truth of his birth.
It's likely we all have opinions on surrogacy. To infertile couples, it can be the only avenue for them to have their own children. To others, it may present obstacles for children in foster care to go to loving families.
Surrogacy is a very complicated subject, and there are an infinite amount of perspectives we can view it through. Though regulation is key to ensure that no one is being exploited, because as we saw with Tiantian, even if it's banned, people will find a way to get what they need.
There's also the issue of whether or not Tiantian should be told about his parents' fate.
What's worse, living your whole life thinking your parents don't love you and don't have any time for you? Or knowing that they're gone and will never come back?
In the end, regardless of what Tiantian's grandparents choose to tell him, he was wanted and will grow up in a loving and caring household, which is more than many children across the world can claim to have.
Hey all, if you liked that episode, feel free to hit that like button down there, and subscribe to Brew if you want to see more content like this. If you want to get a notification every time we upload, make sure to ring that bell.